Also, my parents requested that a marker be placed at my father's cemetery at Mount Zion uh, Cemetery in Bertram, Texas. So they will also have a marker with my dad's family there. And thank you. If anyone would like to speak, for the tree dedication, welcome to do so. If not, I have more. More crying. Sorry. Okay. You, well, thank you, Marie. So, yeah, I'm hoping that it survives. It'll outsurvive all of us, I'm sure. So, okay. Um, and at the end of this, please feel free to walk around. So if we finish early, please take time to do that. And it's really a beautiful place. There's a lantern festival that's going on right now. It's actually takes place October 28th, if you can believe that. So it takes them a full month to set everything up, and they started, I think, 3 weeks ago, setting things up. Okay. I would like to thank everyone for coming to my mom's celebration. In announcing a remembrance for my parents, I had many people ask if we were having a funeral. I would explain that we are holding a celebration of life, which was new to many people. This question had me thinking about what age a person should die, that we do not mourn their death, but rather we celebrate their life. For both of my parents, I could not imagine squeezing more life into a lifetime than they both did. So, like we had for my father 4 years ago, today we are here to celebrate the life of Andy Reed, my mom. In celebration to my mom, I have included some of my mother's written memoirs. So, Phillis Anderson Denowith Reed was born in Michigan on February 3rd, 1928. She was the only child of Louise Anderson Denowith and Philip Denowith. Phyllis was named after her dad, Philip, but she did not like her first name and preferred to be called Andy from my mom's writings. I was never happy with the name Andy. Sorry. I did not feel like a Phyllis. I was never happy with the name Phyllis. I did not feel like a Phyllis, and no one spelled it correctly. In high school, I became Anderson and eventually Andy. I am comfortable with Andy. My husband Dennis called me Phyllis at the altar the night we were married, and in the ensuing years has never called me by that name again. I don't remember at what age our two children realized Andy was not my given name. In my memories, only my grandmother called my mom Phyllis, so she was always Mom or Andy. Andy was the last bloodline Denowith of the Felix Denowith branch of the Denowith ancestry. Felix was from Belgium, and his family came to the United States. My mom was born in a house my grandfather built for my grandmother. This house was on the Denowith family farm, which was on 600 acres of land in Mount Clemens, Michigan. Her father's farm was adjoined by two uncles' farms. Kay, the daughter of one of the uncles, was like my mother's sister. 3 of Kay's children are here with us today: Kathy, Chris, and Kurt. They're actually in order. It's pretty good. Did you guys plan that?
Yeah.
Okay. From my mom's writings. The family farm and our home next to it was 3 miles out in the country. That is nothing today, but in those days, that was far enough from a small city where we lived to keep us quite isolated. And we cousins grew up playing together, and they did. There was a river that ran 2 miles through their land, which she and her cousins learned to swim and boat on in the summer and skate on in the winter. My mom's mom, Mrs. D, as we called her, was a teacher, and she would often pull my mom from school if my grandmother thought she could teach the subject better, which she often did. My mother graduated My mother graduated and went to Michigan State College on the Honor Society. It was at Michigan State that my mom met Anita Davison. Anita is still living in Michigan, just outside of Detroit. Sorry, I just talked to her, so it's a little bit hard. Anita writes, Dear Dan, since I've known your mother longer than probably anyone else, 1946, I would love to be at the gathering. My thoughts and love will be there. So that was her letter. My mom met my father at Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan during the Korean War. My father was in the Air Force and my mother was working on the base. Falling in love, they were married at the Grace Episcopal Church in Michigan in 1952. My mom and dad went back to school at Sul Ross in Southwest Texas. It is at Sul Ross that my mom started and my dad continued their lifelong friendships with Marie and Bob Otto and Dolphy and Dan Blocker. After graduating, they looked for a place to work and live. Sorry. From my mom's writings. We had received our degrees and now both full-time teachers in Texas. We spread out a map on the kitchen table and discussed places we would like to live in the USA and places we would never even consider. Dennis wouldn't consider Michigan and I wouldn't consider Texas. So that ruled out 48. That ruled out 2 of the 48. They ended up in San Clemente, California, where they both were hired as teachers. My mother writes, the schools also found a furnished rental for us on Santa Barbara Avenue in San Clemente, California, and in 1955 we moved to California. As I write this, best friend Dolphia Blocker lives on Santa Barbara Street in Santa Barbara. But the Blockers spent many hours, days, and nights with us on Santa Barbara and San Clemente. Sorry. My mom was not a natural teacher and did not want to learn. Oh, I'm sorry. My mom was not a natural teacher for those who did not want to learn and struggled with teaching from the start. She writes, I was a teacher chosen to go to the new school, and with me went all the problem children. I won't dwell on them or any of this. I was not cut out to be a teacher, and I knew it. My mother and husband both said it would be a good profession should something happen to Dennis. I agreed. I tried. It didn't work. My mom had always been comfortable with doing accounting and secretarial work, and she was quickly hired by the school secretary's husband, who was the manager of the San Clemente Bank of America. My mom writes about how they ended up working in San Gabriel. A gentleman came to my window at the bank, needing to cash a check. I asked for proper identification, and he produced an abundance of San Gabriel teachers type identification. I asked what he taught. He said, speech, drama. I told him my husband did the same, but also a lot of English. Elwood Ramey said, in Elwood fashion, he's looking for another job then, isn't he? Soon my parents moved to Arcadia, and my dad started teaching at San Gabriel High, while my mom worked at the Bank of America, also in San Gabriel. So many friends and students who became friends are here and from those days at San Gabriel High and are still a part of the family today. After I was born, my parents moved us to Monrovia, where my sister and I grew up. Again, so many friends and family from Monrovia. And finally, my parents retired in Bishop, California. My parents put both my sister and I in Scouts. My mom was one of the leaders of Tina's Girl Scout troop. It was a controversial time in the nation's history with violent race riots in Watts and Monrovia. To give you an idea of the timing, my school integrated when I was in 4th grade. During this time, my mom helped create one of the first integrated or non-segregated Girl Scout troops in Los Angeles County. Looking back and having dealt with racial riots in my school, I thought this as an extremely brave thing to do. I'm sure my mom only thought of giving a life experience to the girls. I always teased that I was a Girl Scout before I was a Boy Scout. And that time that I spent with my mom at that time participating in Scouts is still with me today. And back next week, still giving. Growing up in Detroit, in the Detroit area in the 1930s and 40s, my mom could hardly be anything but one of the nation's original motorheads. I remember her telling me stories that her dad was not the best driver and often ended up off the road on an icy shoulder or crashed. So she started driving at a very young age. My mother's love of cars, I'm sure, was one of her traits that endeared her to my dad and him to her. Cars were a big part of my mom and dad's lives, which often evolved around selecting a car to buy, building a motor in the garage, or being at the car races with friends and family. My mom was a bit of a tomboy, which was really great for me, as we were often doing car projects. Thinking about my mom's driving, I still pity the poor souls who tried to pass her on the 605 to 210 freeway overpass as she drove home from Opalite. Nobody was able to ever do that. My mom used to tell me about about her father, who was always busy making things with his hands. Many of his things are on the table over here today. She told me that in the evening time while listening to the radio, her father would be busy carving embellishments on the furniture and picture frames that he made. He could not sit still. I remember this about my mom too. She was always knitting or doing needlepoint in the evenings or on long road trips across the country. For my mom and dad's later trips, they traveled in a Suburban pulling a travel trailer. Because of the Suburban's stiff suspension and high tire pressures, my mom quickly gave it the nickname, many of you know, FT. The T stood for truck, but the acronym did not mean fun truck. It would not do that my mom should have difficulties doing her needlepoint on road trips. My dad, who had spent considerable amount of time, pre-internet mind you, researching the best setup for the Suburban to pull the trailer across thousands and thousands of miles, now had a problem. His perfect setup was in direct conflict with a basic travel need, my mom's needlepoint. My dad worked tirelessly while getting constant updates from my mom to get the suspension and tire pressure just right so that she could do her needlepoint. That need for my mom to stay busy and the ability of my dad to work tirelessly with endless patience and love to accommodate her, and my mom in turn loving his endless patience, was really the secret to a relationship that worked so well for 62 years. Doing home projects, traveling, engaging in hobbies, helping friends and family, or just being together in life, I always felt a sense of their enjoyment and their contentment with each other was bound tighter through their accomplishments together. As a mom, my mom was very firm and direct. We received traditional discipline, but at the same time, a lot of free rein to explore life. Being respectful was the biggest point I remember from both of my parents. But my mom had, how can I say, a disciplinary aura about her that was not just felt by Tina and I, but by Tina and my friends as well. My friends pretty much outright feared my mom. Right, Jimmy? But I know they loved her as well. One story from our youth. My friend Jimmy, David, and I went to Disneyland on a summer night. As adolescent boys, we thought it would be cool to have a couple beers in the parking lot before we entered the actual park. By the way, for those of an age that this is sounding like a good idea, when visiting Disneyland, one should keep in mind that all those people dressed like Goofy and Donald Duck, Snow White, they're all security with radios and possibly guns. We were quickly apprehended and taken to the security center for questioning and holding. Because of the alcohol, security was not going to allow us to drive home. We all knew David and Jimmy's parents were not at home that night, so it would be my parents to come and pick us up. David quickly figured out he alone should ride with my dad in his pickup truck with my dad driving, of course. This would leave Jimmy and I to bear the wrath of my mom driving home in her beloved gold station wagon. I quickly got in the back seat with Jimmy out of the slap zone, buckled in and prepared for a long ride of yelling and beratement. Shortly after leaving the park, my mom said, "Jimmy, I know you weren't involved in any part of this." "No, Mrs. Reed." Great. Jimmy could really do no wrong in my mom's eyes. So it's my turn. But she just started laughing and said, "Well, that was a stupid thing to do." Jimmy and I couldn't believe it. It was like winning the lottery, really. I just talked to Jimmy last month, and we still both can't believe that happened. David, on the other hand, who originally thought Jimmy and I would arrive home close to death, looked physically exhausted and explained that my dad had given him a non-stop, stern lecture on the importance of being a responsible young man. My mom was an only child, and I would often ask her who spoiled her the most, her dad, her mom, or my dad. She would say that my dad did, which says a lot. From my mom's writings, there's no question that I was the very reason of my mother's existence, and she doted on me. My father adored me also, but his one true love was always my mother. My father never laid a hand on me, but my mother was not one to spare the rod and spoil the child. And eventually, I made the drastic mistake of laughing at her red hand after a spanking. She had my father fashion a small slat, also used to help clamp the meat grinder to the table, and I can still see that small slat to this day. Nonetheless, I was spoiled. How could I be otherwise? And I still am to this day. I'm really happy that I had the last years with my parents, the last 4 years with my mom, and the last 2 years with my mom living at my house. I really enjoyed our times together, and I know she did too. Sorry. I tried to spoil her too. One day I thought I spoiled her a little bit too much. We had watched a lot of PBS shows while she stayed with me. In the months before and during the royal wedding, there was a lot of shows on the Queen of England. One morning while helping my mom, she explained to me that she was the Queen of England. She was so insistent about this that I honestly was a little bit scared, because I thought she might have entered into a new realm of consciousness. And I was serious. I was already quickly thinking, how could I accommodate such a thing? Especially if she was the queen, that's a pretty high standard. So I started to gently probe to see what her meaning was, and I said, "How are you the queen?" Honestly, my mom's English was very good because I said, "How are you the queen?" She quickly said, "Well, the queen died, and now I am the queen." She was so serious still in how she said this, I was legitimately starting to think that she actually believed herself to be the queen. And then she said, "And of course that will make you the prince." Well, I knew for sure that wasn't true. So I started to laugh, and thankfully she started to laugh also. We continued that day as Andy and Daniel, a non-royal family in Chino Hills. I wanted to relate some about my mom's passing. Sorry, this part's a little bit sad. From an early age, my mom had a chronic lung condition for which she struggled all of her life. One of my earliest memories of my mom was my grandmother holding me up to the window at St. Mary's Hospital in Monrovia so that I could see her in bed. In the 1950s, she had a lobectomy involving the removal of half her left lung and a portion of her right. She writes about her lungs in her memoirs. The high school boasted $1 million inside pool. That's what the sign down from the school said. How I hated that pool. I always drew PE first period, and they were so proud of that pool. It was a big part of our daily PE. We each one had a period a week of swimming, and in the dead of winter, going all day with wet hair. That was no fun. It also caused me to remember my school days as being well 1 week and sick 2. Eventually, I wrangled a permanent doctor's excuse from swimming, and I realized now it was entirely justified. I've had pneumonia more times than I can remember, and what seems a long time ago, a portion of my lungs removed. I just have lousy lungs. Not having any difficulties with her lungs in the past few years, she was struggling with her breathing at the middle of the week in July. Although not showing any signs of pneumonia, like a fever or abnormal blood pressure, her breathing was accelerated, and her doctor asked on Friday afternoon that she go to the hospital for lung therapy. She had been playing cards that morning and ate a breakfast and a lunch. We were thinking of this hospital trip like so many times my mom had gone to the hospital for lung therapy, but this time was different. My mother died at Pomona Valley Hospital early Saturday morning on July 21st, 2018 of respiratory failure. She was 90 years old. Excuse me. Everyone's birth and death, Everyone's death and birth are generally thought of as the same and also having the same result. Of course, parents of children and children of parents want these events to be perfectly planned with perfect results. While the results are the same, deaths and births are not perfect. But what they are is a unique time for that person and for those around them. In ending, I would like to read the last thing my grandmother, Mrs. Denowith, wrote, which was to my mom. Dear Phillis, I love you from the bottom of my heart, and I hate to leave you and yours, but it's time for me to go soon. Your husband is the kindest, most loving person I have known. Mother. Sorry, that's it for me. And for those who'd like to speak, please, Chris, I thank you for coming up for family. I'm an IT guy, so bear with me. I'm not a communicator like my dad, so I'll try my best.
Okay, I'm tall, but can you hear okay? All right. I know most of you called her Andy, but my family called her cousin Phillis. My mom was Kay Denowith Shiflett, and she called her Phillis, so the rest of us called her Phillis too. She was my mom's cousin, but they were like sisters. My mom died 21 years ago, and so would have wanted to be here today. But you know what? She is here with us today, and this is how I know. So I was packing 2 days ago. I came from Florida, and I was packing 2 days ago, and I was putting the dress into the suitcase. I had just picked it up from the dry cleaners, and I noticed that one of the buttons, and you know they're very distinct, sparkly buttons, one of the buttons was gone. And I went, oh my gosh. And so I called up the dry cleaners. I'm like, this is the dress I want to wear. I need the button. And of course they couldn't find it. And so I looked through my mom's button box. And I found an exact replica of these buttons. This is a modern dress.
Wow.
My mom's buttons, it could have been my grandmother's buttons for all I know. But I know my mom is with us today celebrating Phyllis's life. So I always liked going from Sacramento to see my LA cousins. I had a great relationship with Tina, and my brother Kurt had a great relationship with Dan, or Danny as we called him. I always enjoyed Phyllis and Dennis, but I didn't really have a real relationship with them until after my mom died. And that was when email was a big means of communication. And Phyllis used to write to my mom just pages and pages and pages of a letter. And I would always read that letter because I always found it very interesting. And after my mom died, she would write pages and pages and pages of an email to me. And I would write back pages and pages and pages of email to her. So that's how we became really close. And then at least once a year, my husband Jim and I would go and visit them at Virginia Lakes or to Bishop. We had a timeshare at David Wally's in near Reno, Nevada. And whenever we went there, we would make sure to go see Phyllis and Dennis. And Jim had a very special relationship with Dennis. They both had the military background, and I had a very special relationship with Phyllis. In fact, when we moved our family from Sacramento to Florida, we put everything we had into a big moving van, and that was our main stop in California to say goodbye, was to Phyllis and Dennis in Bishop. And Phyllis liked to say that she was not a good hostess, but she always made us feel welcome and special, just like her son Danny has done with us, my sister and I, this time around. There was no pretense or put on airs with Phyllis. What you saw was what you got, and that's what we loved about her. In one of our conversations, when my girls were little and they were listening, because they always sat and listened in on everything, she screwed up her face like she always used to do and held up her middle finger for emphasis, and that was a first for my children. They had never seen that before. And in fact, one of them just texted me and said, make sure you tell everybody that what I remember about her is she always called the Jeep the Yeep. So that made a big impression. My mom's side of the family was very Catholic. Phyllis was always adamant that she was an atheist. Yet I always got comfort from the fact that she so loved and appreciated and admired the beauty around her in the mountains from her Bishop window, the wildlife that she loved so much, and the wonder of nature. She was just a unique, one-of-a-kind character, and when she would bemoan the fact that she was still alive when the rest of the family had died, she thought she'd be first because of her lungs, I would tell her that it was my belief that she was still here because God didn't know what to do with her. Now it's my belief that she's reunited with Dennis and with my mom and dad.
Hello, my father's oldest son. I do agree with Chris that what you see is what you got with my grandma. I also agree with my dad, most definitely, that this is a great tree to represent my grandmother. It's a very hardy tree, and one of the greatest things that I respect about my grandmother is her determination. She was very, very determined. When she set her mind to something, there was no stopping her. One of the stories my dad tells me is he says that she was able to write 110 words or type 110 words with 100% accuracy. I mean, that's impressive. And I think I got a lot of that from her. And, I was a pretty tough kid growing up, and she kind of loved me a lot because of that. She was a tough kid as well, and she related to me. And I miss her. I miss some of the times that her and my grandfather would come down to the group homes and pick me up, and we'd go out and do some stuff. And I really I miss her, and I like to, you know, think that I was good to her and I took care of her. You know, I remember I took her, got her a Big Mac, and she ate the whole thing. She ate the whole thing, and yeah, and it was I well, I miss her a lot, and thank you all for coming.
I second that. No. Yeah, no, my grandma was just like tough woman, but she was so strong. And for me, it was just like being her, her first granddaughter was just kind of a funny relationship because she was really gentle with me. I mean, like what I remember, it's just like always sitting with her on the couch, and she would just always talk to me about, whatever she was making. I was really always interested in that. And the one thing I really remember, and I think my siblings can remember too,